Go ahead.
Thank you. Welcome, everybody. We want to welcome you to our first national convening of our brand new National Student Attendance, Engagement, and Success Center. And we think you're going to be in for a very informative and engaging and thought-provoking next 2 days as we bring to you a wide range of presentations on some really important topics to the success of our students. The formal goals of our convening are to introduce the U.S. Department of Education's Office of Safe and Healthy Students New Technical Assistance Center, our National Student Attendance and Engagement and Success Center. We want to increase participants' understanding of chronic absenteeism, early warning systems, and success mentors, and their implications for improving student success. Finally, we're going to offer some sessions on chronic absenteeism, early warning systems, and success mentors, and also talk about their implications for the Every Student Succeeds Act. In broad terms, our center and this convening is really on a key part of the student success equation, which is that we know our students need and deserve a good teacher and a good lesson in every class every day, and that's essential for their success. But in order for them to get the full benefit of that great teaching and learning and instruction, students need to come every day, they need to be able to focus in class, and they need to be able to get their work done. And lots of things, especially when they live in poverty, work against that. And that's really where our center comes in, really giving people the knowledge and the insight and the community to learn together to figure out how to address these issues so our students can come every day. So they will be focused in class, and they will be able to get their work done and then benefit from all that great teaching and learning going on. So the motto of our school is supporting safe and healthy students through early warning systems and success mentors. And our mission is to disseminate evidence-based practices and build and facilitate communities of practice to help students attend every day, be engaged in school, and succeed academically so they graduate high school prepared for college, career, and civic life. I'm happy and fortunate to be a co-director of this effort along with Patricia, who you'll hear from in a minute, and a great and immense team of both researchers and practitioners who are doing the real work, and yourselves included as you join our community of practice. Just a minute about our new Technical Assistance Center. We have a couple of great national partners, both Attendance Works and Mentor. Each of them have deep and rich websites I encourage you to visit. And they will be participating in many of the plenary sessions and breakout sessions throughout our virtual convening. Our center is going to have 2 nationwide communities of practice, one centered around success mentors, this idea of how do you organize adults in the building and the community to provide students direct supportive, caring relationships with adults that encourage them to come every day, be focused in class, and get their work done. And a second community of practice related with using early warning systems and tiered intervention supports. How do we pay attention to the kids when they signal, help, I'm in trouble, I need some help? How do we do that early? How do we do that effectively? And how do we do that in a way that schools can manage with the resources they have? That's really what that community of practice will focus on. And you can see there's good overlap between the two, so you may want to participate in both at some level. Some of our activities we're going to have is we'll have a website coming very soon. It'll be a great centralized hub for resources and communication. We've had some. We're going to have ongoing webinars. We're going to have office hours where you can actually sign up and get time to talk one-to-one with some experts, both leading practitioners and researchers in the fields. We'll have discussion boards and peer learning activities. We'll be able to offer some limited on-site technical assistance, and we're going to have a couple of great national convenings. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Patricia to tell us what we're going to do over the next couple of days.
Thanks so much, Bob, and welcome everyone. This is Patricia Balanis from JFF. And just to say at the outset that JFF is really pleased to be leading the work of the new National Center alongside my colleagues from Everyone Graduates Center and also in partnership with our other national partners, Mentor and Attendance Works. As Bob said, you will be hearing from representatives from all 4 organizations over the course of the next 2 days, and also from some of our colleagues in the Office of Safe and Healthy Students. So I just want to very briefly share some information about our agenda for the next 2 days. As Bob has also said, we have a full and rich program for today and tomorrow. And we're really pleased that we have more than 350 people who will join us over the course of the 2 days. So today we will host a number of plenary sessions on early warning systems and chronic absenteeism. Day 2 starts off with another plenary session focused on success mentors and their role in student attendance and success. As I said, you will hear from Everyone Graduates Centre, Mentor, Attendance Works, and JFF. Each of the sessions will be led by a national expert in their field. We're also really pleased to be joined by some representatives from states, districts, and schools who will participate as panelists during some of our sessions. And I want to thank them in advance for being so willing to share their experiences with us. Each of the sessions will have a facilitator who will share general information about our new centre, highlight some upcoming events, and we'll make sure to capture your questions throughout the 2 days. Thank you very much to those of you who submitted some questions in advance. We had a lot of them. Through the convening, you will have an opportunity to ask additional questions via the chat function. We may not be able to answer all of them due to the large number of folks who've registered for our convening, but we will be sure to get the answers sent out by email as soon as possible afterwards. All of the sessions will be recorded, and a link to access the recordings will be sent out again in an email after our convening. But this is our first national convening, and we would really love your feedback. There will be an opportunity at the end of each of our sessions to share your feedback, and I thank you in advance for taking the time to do that. Finally, just to add to Bob's thanks, we really appreciate you taking the time to join us today and tomorrow. I hope you find it valuable, a good use of your time, and we very much look forward to continuing the dialogue with you in the months ahead. Thank you so much. And we will now transition to our first plenary.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Antel Proctor from the National Student Attendance Engagement and Success Center. Welcome to today's first plenary, Early Warning Systems, an Introduction to Research Background and Key Components of Implementation. Please allow me to share some brief details about today's session. Our presenter, Johan Liljengren from the National Student Attendance Engagement and Success Center. Johan is the Division Manager at Talent Development Secondary, a whole school reform model based at Johns Hopkins University, and an early warning systems facilitator and trainer with the Everyone Graduates Center, also based at Johns Hopkins University. The centers at Johns Hopkins focus on research, development, and strategies for schools, districts, and states to keep all students on track for high school graduation and post-secondary success. Johan works with a team of facilitators who support middle and high schools across the country with organizational changes, teacher collaboration, and early warning systems in order to provide students with the support they need. He oversees TDS's approach to early warning systems and regularly presents and trains at local, state, and national events on how EWS can be used to keep all students on track to graduation. Johan has worked at multiple levels of implementation of early warning systems, including as the leader of the work at a K-8 school in Philadelphia. Starting in 2008, this work has included support within the Diplomas Now model, a partnership between Talent Development Secondary, City Year, and Communities in School, which began in Philadelphia and has now expanded to over 50 schools across the country. Today's session will last for approximately 1 hour and 15 minutes. We will be placing everyone on mute. Please do not unmute yourself, but instead refer to the chat function on the right side of the screen if you would like to ask a question or make a comment. Any unanswered questions will be answered by email within the next couple of weeks. Before I hand over to Johan, I wanted to share with you the mission of our National Center. The mission of the center is to disseminate evidence-based practices and build and facilitate communities of practice to help students attend every day, be engaged in school, and succeed academically so that they graduate high school prepared for college, career, and civic life. Johan, I pass it on to you now.
Great. Thanks, Chantel. All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining this afternoon. Looking forward to sharing a little bit about early warning systems. And this is kind of how we've structured the agenda for this afternoon, kind of into 3 different pieces. So the first part, we'll be digging into some of the background research that really helped to lead to the development of early warning systems, and talking about how some of that influences different approaches that we take within that. So we'll start with that for basically the first third of it. We'll have a small break there to do a few minutes of questions if we can around the research components of it. Then we'll move into talking about kind of what are the key components of implementation. So what does this actually look like if you were to be at a school doing an early warning system, or be in a district that's having an early warning system. So that's kind of the second third. And then lastly, we're going to talk about implementation pieces. So we have a guest who's been able to join, Marcus Gittens, who works for in the Puget Sound region, and actually talk about the regional role. So we'll be able to hear about kind of the regional role and state role and district role, about kind of what the different folks are doing as part of early warning systems. Most of our implementation pieces will be about kind of school-based work, but there's a huge role about how do we build this system to support all of those schools, how do we make sure that they are have what they need as well. So, and then lastly, we'll just end with ideas for getting started. So we're gearing this towards kind of the basic introduction, and so we'll hopefully be ending with some things that people can go and use and try and get started on right away. All right, so to start with, we really see this. I want to share some of the context for early warning systems and the research behind some of it. So first off, we know that dropping out of high school has huge implications for individual students. So students are much more likely to be unemployed, be incarcerated, have health issues, and pass on disadvantages to their children. So obviously it has huge implications for an individual student. However, if you have many students or many individuals who have been impacted by that within a community, it has huge impacts on that community as well. And so we really see this at individual costs, of course, but obviously has big community costs, and really is important for all of us to look at. So the second thing is that we have seen around graduation rates, and we've done a fair amount at the center at Johns Hopkins that we're a part of, and a fair amount of research around the high school graduation rate. And we've seen really good progress over the past 10 years in the high school graduation rate. So we're above 82% as a nation, but a couple of things with that. So one, we still have more progress, so 82% is not where we want to be. We need to keep improving and keep getting more students across that stage. But we also see differences across a wide variety of things. So one, we see differences geographically. So you can see different states have different levels of graduation rates. If you were to dig into a state and look at county levels or district levels, you would see differences there as well. So we have some differences that we can help us to target some of this work. We also see differences across different categories. So we have seen that students with special education status are graduating at lower rates. We see that students who are living in poverty are graduating at lower rates as well. So this can help us to target some of our work and target, okay, where do we need to focus energy to try to raise the graduation rate for all students and keep pushing this forward. The other thing that we have seen is that we've been able to reduce the number of schools that low graduation rate high schools, so which we're classifying here as schools with graduation rates less than 67%. So there are fewer of those schools, but you can see that they are spread quite widely across the country. There are pockets of them where there are more, but it is really these high schools are spread across the country. So, but again, another way that we're looking at and learning about how we can target and focus this support and impacting this graduation rate. And they're disproportionately clustered as well. So they are spread across the country, but you can find them in certain places. So helping to target that. And then the last thing I mentioned before we look at the early warning system specifically, or early warning indicators specific research, is that poverty complicates the work of this in our schools. So it makes it much harder for students to attend, to focus in class, to complete their assignments. So we know that poverty has an impact on this, and we have to look at where that impacts our schools. All right, so this is really where the early warning systems are aimed to improve. So our ultimate goal in this is improving students being able to graduate from high school ready for what's next. And so early warning systems are really at the early stages of impacting that. So early warning systems are aimed at improving attendance, improving effort and engagement, improving course passage and achievement, and improving promotion rates, and ultimately improving graduation rates. So it's the early work that we need to do to impact those ultimate outcomes for students. And I share this chart. This is from the University of Chicago, and I think really shows kind of the argument that we're making about the impact of early warning systems, or the impact of focusing on these indicators. So if you look at the gray line in this one, the folks at the consortium for Chicago School Research were looking at the on-track rate for 9th grade students, and had been tracking that year over year. And so if you look at the gray line, they were able to start to increase that. So it went, it was in the high 50s, up into the 60s, and now into the 70s and low 80s as well. And so if early warning systems if we're really doing the work, if we're really able to raise that 9th grade on-track rate, we're able to intervene, get students on track by the end of 9th grade, we should see an impact 4 years later in their graduation rate. And this is what they have started to see. So starting to see that the trend of the graduation rate 4 years later is actually almost mirroring the on-track rate, which to me it just made such a good case of why this on-track or this early warning approach makes sense and really does have that impact on graduation. All right, so to start the kind of the research that led to this, and a lot of this we are calling these early warning systems, but much of the early research was around early warning indicators is what you'll often hear in terms of the terms for this. And the idea for this was trying to figure out which of the indicators correlated most highly with students who would be likely to disengage and drop out, or likely to graduate. And you're trying to look for a couple of different things in this. One, you're trying to look at, are they accurate predictors of a student that would drop out? And the other thing is you're looking at, does it capture a large number of the eventual dropouts? So if you had to look at all of these different indicators, easier to do in person, but we can probably enter into the chat window as part of this. If you had to pick one of these as being the most predictive of a 6th grade student that you had in your school that would then be most likely to drop out and not make it through high school, which would you pick? So that's kind of the basic idea, is we're trying to look at all these different characteristics and say which of these indicators was most correlated with students who would not make it through high school. And what we found that as we looked at these different indicators, there were 3 of them that came to the top and became most predictive of those. So the first one was poor attendance. So it looks like somebody entered in kind of just as I was sharing it, actually, that poor attendance was their guess. So poor attendance was one of them. Behavior marks, and so this one this was in Philadelphia, and they were actually getting a report card grade on behavior. So they got a poor mark for behavior, and they had failed 6th grade math or failed 6th grade English. And so it was those three things rose to the top of all of those different characteristics that I shared on the previous slide. And so we have kind of thought of those as the ABCs of school success, so attendance, behavior, and course performance. And you'll see that there's some variation that we'll talk through among the research, but that those have been found to be predictive in many different spaces. So this is the original chart, and I'll talk through a little bit about what, so you can kind of see where it was. So I'll take this kind of orangish peach-colored line on the bottom. So this was basically students who had failed a 6th grade literacy or English class, and they followed that group of students through to 7th grade, to 8th grade, to 9th grade, all the way through to when we would think that they would graduate from high school, and trying to see how many of those students stayed on track. So what you see is that already by 7th grade, we're down near about 60%. So 60% of those kids who failed a 6th grade English class were off track in 7th grade. So some of them had been held back in order to finish that. Some of them had disengaged completely and were no longer there, but that group had already shrunk in 1 year. You follow it to 8th grade, it goes a little bit lower. Into 9th grade, it's about the same. And then by 10th grade, we're down near about 25%. So 25% of the kids who failed a 6th grade math or English class were in the 10th grade when we would expect them with the credits they needed. So a huge drop-off. And if you continue to follow that line through 12th grade to graduation, and we actually followed 1 year beyond graduation as well. And so that across those different ones, it was 10 to 20%. It was in between 10 and 20%, depending on the indicator, of those kids who were graduating. So obviously, it was hugely predictive of students who were going to disengage, or if we didn't do something, we're disengaging and not making it through to high school graduation. So the second thing I'll share on this, so this is the same chart. So the bottom part of it is the same, so the attendance, behavior, course performance, so math and literacy. And then the top one is the comparison group. So I share this for a couple of reasons. The comparison group are kids in 6th grade who look really promising. Kids who we would say are high achievers. They're looking good. They have 90% plus attendance, excellent behavior, passing courses. And this is was the state test at the time in Pennsylvania. It's at or above basic on the PSSA. So they're doing well in their test scores, their classes, they're coming to school. And so you do see that we see some drop with students. So not all students will be able to know who they are in 6th grade. There will be some who will seem to be doing okay and run into something that pushes them one way or the other. So we definitely we don't know all of those students, but you can see the gap. There's over a 50 percentage point gap between those two lines as you get to 12th grade and graduation. So it's a large number of those students that we can identify, and the gap is enormous between those two different groups. So that's the one in Philadelphia. I'm going to share a couple of others from different places around the country, and we've seen this in some, we've seen it in doing urban districts. We've seen it in some statewide looks at this as well, and we've seen similar patterns to this. So this one is in Los Angeles, and we're seeing that the timing of courses, of course failure matters. So the bottom line here is middle school. So you're seeing the patterns of if you failed a course in middle school, so across the bottom, how many courses you failed. And then on the vertical axis, you're seeing the percentage of those students that graduated. So you're seeing that if students fail courses earlier, their graduation rate is lower than if they're able to be successful, continue to pass courses further into high school. It still matters immensely. You can see that once students have failed more than 5 courses, that their graduation rate ends up being below 50%. So it has huge impact, obviously, failing any courses, but the earlier you fail courses has an impact as well. we've seen, and this one is from the Chicago consortium that I mentioned earlier. And this has helped, one, again, reaffirm this importance of course passage and how predictive it is, but also has helped us think about how do we push kids in different directions. So this is a freshman GPA, so looking at the freshman GPA, so more courses are taken into account in that. And then again, along the vertical axis is percentage of students graduating. So you can see that virtually all of the students with less than a D, so are, a GPA of 0 to 0.5, so very low GPAs. Virtually all of those students are failing to graduate, so less than 10% of those. So, and then on the flip side, you can see it's the other way. So students with a 3.0 or higher at the end of 9th grade, virtually all of those students are graduating. So 93%, 97, and 98% of those students are graduating. And then in the middle, it's much less certain. So it really varies, and they could go, in some ways we think of this, they could go different ways. We don't know where those students are. And this especially, and some other work that they've done in Chicago has really helped us think about, this is about making sure that students don't fail courses, but it's obvious also trying to help push students to the high end. How do we get more students who can achieve at A and B levels? That's where we're seeing if we can get students to achieve at that level, those are students who are graduating more often, and actually I think I have later down in the slides as well, those are students who are going to post-secondary more often and persisting in post-secondary more often as well, and at higher rates. So that's a couple of things on course performance. We're seeing that attendance matters in the middle grades as well as in high school. So this is, again, from the same study that the previous one from Los Angeles. So you're seeing across the bottom that as students is number of absences that students have, 7th, 8th, and 9th grade, and then the graduation rate from those. Pretty consistently declines as students go from 0 to 5, 6 to 10, and 11 to 20. So we're knowing that matters in the middle grades, and we really know this afternoon, if you're able to attend the session on chronic absenteeism, you dig into attendance even more. We're seeing these patterns even earlier. We're seeing these in kindergarten, in 1st grade. We're seeing these patterns start already. So they'll dig a little bit more into attendance, especially in the how we're seeing that across all grades. So again, we see attendance matter in middle grades. We see it matter in high school. So again, this is a similar chart, days absent per semester from the 9th grade year across the bottom, and percentage graduation rate across the left-hand side. So again, we see pretty high impact from missing days per semester. So and as you can see, also students who are basically not graduating, so not missing any days, so 0 to 4 days, we're seeing students graduate at pretty high rates in that as well. And then the last thing that last one I'll mention here, and then we'll dig into kind of what are some of the implications for some of these pieces, is that one question that often comes up is around ACT scores or state achievement tests, and where those fit into this. How do we think about those in terms of early warning systems? And we've found this actually a number of different times, that GPAs and grades have actually been stronger predictions of high school graduation. This one is actually showing stronger prediction of college graduation. So they were looking at kids with the same ACT score range, so pretty similar on the ACT, but then differences in graduation rates, or differences in GPAs, sorry, and then what their graduation rates were. And saw pretty big differences in that. So a student who could score in the 21 to 23 range for an ACT, but was a 2.0 or below, those students are struggling to attend and graduate college. But if you look at a student in that same range, but who's a 3.0 to a 3.4 GPA, that student has learned and figured out things that have helped them be successful in college, and so in that post-secondary space. And then we've seen that a number of times that we've seen grades be more predictive of high school graduation and attendance and persistence in college as well. So if folks are interested in digging more into this, there are a bunch of different folks. A lot of the research that I cited kind of that really found a lot of these patterns has happened kind of in the 2006 to 2010 range. So this is a lot of the original research. It was trying to kind of validate those different ones. A lot of it has moved on to how do we figure out kind of the next level of information on that. So are different levels of attendance more powerful in one place or the other, or more predictive in one place or the other? There's a lot more focus on what's the next, how do you go to the next level? What happens in post-secondary space? Are these predictive of those as well? So some of the research has adapted slightly since then as folks have moved into that. A lot of the original research kind of identifying these ABCs as predictors happened in that space. There's a number of different things you could look at if you're interested in reading some of that original research that has helped us identify these. So what we've come out of this with is we have our ABCs of school success. So attendance, missing school and class, behavior, both serious incidents and mild sustained misbehavior, and then course performance. So core courses, and then particularly math and English in the middle grades, but core courses as we look at the high school. So the last thing on the research, I'm just going to do a quick piece on each of the different indicators. And kind of implications for how we think about implementation. So first one around attendance, and again, we have a full session around chronic absenteeism this afternoon, so you'll be able to go more in depth into that. But a couple of things to think about. So one is we think of this as success factors and risk factors. So we have success factors being, we're seeing that it matters to have high attendance, so it's actually missing less than 5 days. And the risk factor, of course, is this, unlikely to graduate or likely to disengage. So we have thought of this as less than 90%, so missing more than 10% of school. So, and for most folks, we have about 180 days in a school year. So that's 18 days. So a student missing more than that, we've seen pretty consistently that is a flag. It has varied some, so there has been some variation in what that is, but that's what we have put forward as our recommendation, is that less than 10% we need to do something, we need to intervene. There is some work that folks have done around trying to validate what the local kind of cut point or threshold is. So there definitely is work going on to make sure that that is accurate with data for your students in your city, or region or state, wherever you are. But that's what we have started with and recommending as a starting point. And then the other thing is that for attendance, we really need to think about this as there are things that pushing and pulling students both to attend and not attend school. So we have to think about both of those when we're trying to address that. Some of that is outside of school and some of that is in school. There are things we can do in a school building that pull students in. There are things we can do in a school building that sometimes push students away. So how do we think about both the push and pull of getting students into class, into school, and engaged? And then lastly, how do we think about removing barriers? Sometimes students are running into things that, challenges that they're seeing in their life. How do we think about, removing barriers for students to help them be able to attend? And then I'll share this chart all the time for absences, and I borrowed this from Attendance Works, and you might see it this afternoon, but I think it's just a really good indication. So when you first look at this chart, I oftentimes, it doesn't seem that bad. So it's, we missed a couple days in September, 1 day this week in October, 1 day the next week, 3 days in January. Seems to be pretty scattered, and I think scattered enough that if you weren't looking at this regularly, you might not notice that a student is accumulating a lot of days. So it doesn't seem kind of that bad. But if you actually count this up, this is 23 days that a student has missed throughout the year. So they're already below that 90% threshold. So I think it's just a really good visual of, like, you know, if we don't have a good system set up, this is a student we might miss, right? Doesn't seem to be they're not gone for 2 weeks. They're kind of spread throughout, but can be they can add up. This student has missed 23 days of school. That's if you think about it in kind of time period, they've missed over a month of instruction because of that. So most schools have around 20 to 25 days of instruction a month. They've already missed a month of what we're trying to teach in the classroom. So in many ways, not surprising that they have big gaps. So for behavior, some of our takeaways there. So one, we know that students with sustained mild misbehavior fall off track in large numbers. So everyone is usually tracking suspensions, but we have to track this sustained mild misbehavior as well. And I think that's one of our big things for behaviors. This is oftentimes, I think, of two different students. So a student who's able to be, get along with peers, work with peers, seems to be doing fine, has a serious incident, something that is a suspendable, so they get suspended for that, but then they come back and they seem to be able to integrate back with their peers, back with other adults. Versus a student who might fall under our sustained mild misbehavior is a student who, seems to be in the office or getting referrals, 3 or 4 times a week from 3 or 4 different teachers. So is really struggling to figure out how do I navigate this? I can't seem to get along with other students, can't seem to get along with multiple adults with different rules. That student is what we've seen is there's as much risk there as a student with a serious incident. So we need to think about both of those. How do we monitor that? How do we track those, both sides of that? And then lastly, the one that I think is really interesting for behavior is we really have to think about what is the on-track or college and career-ready side of behavior. And I think there's a lot of interesting work going on in this right now. We're going to have a breakout session on this tomorrow to talk a little bit more in depth into it. But the absence of a negative behavior is not our college and career ready, right? So that can't be the same. So how do we think about what are those skills that we know successful students have? How do we teach those? How do we model those? How do we measure those in a way that we can be consistent with that? And I think that's really where it would be great to see the behavior conversation go, is how do we think about those, what do successful students demonstrate? How do we move to that, and not just trying to eliminate bad behavior, but we think about what are those behaviors we're trying to teach. There are a couple of things that are around this that help to think about this. So there's a couple of things around surveys that are doing around behavior and how it's very much linked to climate and culture. So there's some that are climate surveys that are available through the U.S. Department of Ed. There's also some social emotional surveys. There are a bunch of social emotional surveys that are available for purchase that are out there. There's a couple of them that are, that have started to dig into this that are free options, but there are options out there if people are trying to look at this behavior and look at the connection with climate and culture. So. And then the last one around course performance is really that we've seen that course performance is as important for students' long-term success as how they do on their test scores. So we need to be tracking, monitoring, encouraging good performance in that. And then as I mentioned earlier, we of course need to worry about students with D's and F's. Those are students who we need to worry about, especially in math and English in the middle grades. And then on the flip side of that, we have to try to figure out how do we get more students achieving at A or B levels. Those are the students we're seeing achieve more consistently in high school, as well as enroll and persist in post-secondary as well. So final thoughts on kind of the research, then we'll pause for a few minutes. It looks like a couple of questions have come in on the chat we'll try to tackle before we move into kind of implementation components. So again, this is success factors and risk factors. So I really think that early warning systems, yes, it was designed based off of this research around this kind of off-track category risk factor, but I really think it can be a comprehensive way to look at how all of your students are doing. So not just eliminating off-track, but how do we get students college and career ready, push them into that high achieving category. So the other things that I mentioned is that I think there's actually some good news in that there is space for us to intervene and respond. Students are oftentimes starting with one indicator and developing more over time. They are oftentimes signaling multiple years before they completely disengage from school, which to me says there is an opportunity to intervene and respond. We have a window there where a student is, they're waving their hands, they're flagging, there's something going on, they need help with something, but they're still there, they're still showing up, they're still responding to some of those things. So I think there's an opportunity to try to impact students in that space. So, and then lastly, as we move into the second part about implementation, we really have to think of, there are really a wide variety of things inside and outside of school that contribute to why students have these indicators. So that really gets at our challenge of how do we impact this? How do we get more students into our on-track, our high achievement categories? All right, so I think I'm going to have Dantel help me facilitate hopefully a couple of questions that we can take before we go into the implementation components.
Thanks, Johan. We got 2 questions and 1 comment. The first question is from Ryan Blank. He wants to know how many students were in the study.
So it varies among the different ones. If it came during the first study that I was mentioning in Philadelphia, this basically looked at all students in the school district of Philadelphia. So at that point, I think we're in between 12 and 13,000 6th grade students in the city of Philadelphia. Some of the other ones have had slightly different numbers. I'd have to double check on those. That was the Philadelphia study, was that many kids.
The second question is also from Ryan Blank, and he would like to know, what is the difference between missing school and missing class?
Yeah, so this one, this is part of our challenge of figuring out the best way to monitor and track attendance. And the missing school and missing class distinctions are really based off of how districts currently track that. So, for instance, there are districts where the policy is that as long as you attend 4 of the 8 periods of the day, you are counted as present for that day. So that's, that there are definitions where it's the 2nd period of the day, and that's when attendance is taken for the day. That's kind of our official one. So I think ultimately, the ideal measurement of that would be like missed instructional time. Is like what would be the best measure of that. It's just that we don't have that. That's harder to do, right? That's much harder to do. There are some places that are doing period by period attendance, so you can get a more accurate picture. And I think that is especially important as you dig into how you're gonna respond to that attendance data. A student who's missing, has missed first period 10 times, but has 1 absence the rest of the day in periods 2 through 7. That's a much different. We're going to do something different than a student who's missed 10 times in all 7 of them. So I think it helps a lot with our responses.
Thank you. And we have a comment from Megan Thornton. She would be interested in the SES percentages among the students in the study. And that's all we have for questions for now.
Okay. Yeah, so it varies. The SES in those different groups. So if folks are interested in stuff, we'll have our contact info on this. So happy to dig in deeper. It has varied, in some of those different spaces what it is. So we can definitely connect with you if you're interested in digging deeper into that and looking at it. Poverty definitely complicates it, right? So it definitely makes things more challenging for students. So we are seeing higher percentages in many cases. But yeah, it varies among those studies that I shared. So probably best if we just connect on that and we can get you something, make sure it's exact. So. All right, thanks, Chantel. We'll keep moving. So if folks have questions and stuff, please feel free to keep putting in, and we'll get back to them again at the end. So, all right. So we're going to move into implementation. So kind of what does this actually look like in a school? What are teachers doing? What are principals doing as part of an early warning system? I'm going to share a couple of core ideas for early warning systems. So, and a lot of this you'll see the connection to the research that I just shared. So first one, to graduate college and career ready, students need to successfully navigate key transition and acquire a set of academic behaviors. We've thought of this as, they need to learn how to be successful at school. And so if they can do that at multiple points, those are the students we're seeing be successful. The second one, built off a lot of the research I just shared, is that students signal that they are on or off track towards these outcomes through their behaviors. So we can oftentimes tell whether they're on or off track for those transitions. The third one is we really believe that by tracking these indicators, that it's possible to identify when students are beginning to fall off track, and it gives us an opportunity to intervene and change that trajectory. That because you were struggling with attendance in 6th grade, that doesn't have to mean that you're not going to make it through to high school graduation. We think that there's an opportunity to intervene to help change that path. And then lastly, we think that early warning systems this can be a school-wide approach to driving interventions about how do we provide prevention, how do we provide targeted supports, how do we work across the spectrum. Now, this is not just a strategy for those quote-unquote at-risk students. This can be a strategy for how do you organize across your whole school. So this has really helped us to think about early warning systems, and this is I see this, and you probably see a couple of different diagrams of this as different folks are describing early warning systems. But a lot of times we think of it as just the indicator side. So an early warning system is a data system. It needs to have reliable, valid, predictive information. It needs to be updated regularly, helps me take action as a staff member in a school or a district. But a lot of focus on the indicator side, which is incredibly important and is incredibly challenging in many cases to make that information as useful and as ready as possible. What we're really trying to talk about with interventions or with early warning systems is that unless that is paired with an intervention system, we really don't see you have half of what you need. So we're trying to talk about these two together. So the early warning data system combined with the early warning intervention system. So you're really be pairing these together. And we have really, oops, sorry, I went too far here. And so we're really seeing that, and a couple of reasons. We're seeing a tiered intervention or a multi-tiered levels of supports. So if folks are familiar with other systems that use this same approach, RTI, or response to intervention, uses a similar multi-tiered intervention approach. PBIS, or positive behavior intervention supports, uses a similar approach. MTSS, which is a multi-tiered system of supports. So there's a lot of different ones that are built off of this same idea, and we have seen that that's essential in doing this. And we will, so you'll see us use that language throughout. The other one that I will mention, and this is there's a practitioner's guide to implementing early warning systems, which goes through a similar set of ones. This is from the Regional Educational Laboratory Northwest that has done a lot of work around early warning systems as well, of kind of thinking about the different things that you need to do or what you'd be seeing in a school. So be having a team that's working together, they're looking at indicators and reports, they're linking indicators to interventions, and they're checking on interventions. So all of these different pieces as part of that system of supports. So, and as I mentioned before, this is, I think, is one of the important things with early warning systems is just there are multiple connection points. So response to intervention, positive behavior supports, multi-tiered system of supports, there are multiple connection points, and the more that we can get these systems to be together, working together, the more valuable I think it can be. If you have 4 different systems, you have your RTI and your PBIS and your EWS and your MTSS as 4 different things, it's confusing and more challenging. And I think there are good connection points among all of these different initiatives where we can this can really be about how do we get the whole school to work together around using this data and supporting students, and not based on individual initiatives. So the basic idea for getting started in this is how do we organize this data into useful information? And folks are going to use this in a variety of different ways. So when early warning system is used across the whole school, it's being used in a variety of spaces. So your leadership team, administration is looking at trend data. They're looking at ABC trend data. So they're seeing, are there particular grades that are struggling more than others? Are there particular classes that are doing better than others? What are the trends showing me? How am I seeing differences here where I might be able to respond and support different groups? How do I set up a good process so that I make sure my teams have the data that they need, make sure they're following through when they commit to supporting a student or creating initiative? So the leadership team is very, involved in that work. You have small learning communities or teams, so this can take a variety of different spaces. It can be a grade level team. It could be a 9th grade academy team. And to a lesser extent, I have seen some departments use it as well. It's a little bit harder, I think, when it's just one subject area, but I've seen them build it in there as well. So you're having those folks doing initiatives as well as talking about students. And then you're digging that down even deeper. You're having teams of teachers. So teachers who teach the same students are having conversations about students, about those kids that they teach. They're talking about how do you build up a good culture so that students want to be in our classes. And then lastly, there's many schools that we're having some type of student support team. So non-teaching staff, oftentimes social workers, counselors, nurses, security staff, after-school providers, other folks who are involved in the building, involved in the work of the school. How are they helping coordinate this? So I think at its best, it really is worked on. Different pieces are worked on throughout the building. So, and the real basic, I think, building block of it is that you're building from a common set of ABC data about your students. So this, very basic chart has, attendance from the end of last year and so far this year, behavior from the end of last year and so far this year, a grade from the end of last year and so far this year for 2 courses, and you could obviously have 4 or 6 courses depending on what a student is taking. And so you're able to get a number of different things. You're able to see, one, if there's progress from one point in time to another. You're able to look at, do some of these things interact with each other? Does those 5 days that John has missed in September, is that in his math class? You start to see how they interact or if they interact together. So that's kind of the basic idea, is how do we get, get to see a comprehensive look across the ABCs for an individual student. And so I've seen folks start with just this basic one and say, okay, if we're going to talk about 5 students, let's compile this data and pull it together. So it can be that basic at its starting point. Of course, as you build that out, you can see a lot more. So this is a full class of students. So we have ABC data. So you have attendance here on the left, absences, tardies, percentage present. You have suspensions. You have all 4 core course grades. So you see some things, similar things for a student. However, you also might see things across a classroom of students. So if you see in this example here, in our science class, we have more failures in the science class than in any other class. So is there something going on in there that we could address by working with the teacher that we might not have to chase and go student by student to try to figure out why each of those students isn't passing. So we're looking at things that might work across students on a larger scale as well. And then the second thing that this one has, and this is where some of the behavior work has gone, is looking at some of the, this is a resiliency survey that students could take. And so students took a resiliency survey, and so you can see there's actually some early indications of a student that might be falling off track. So it's not showing up in their course grades yet, but they seem to have a high level of stress, low well-being, and no connections to school. So what do we need to do for that student? And so that's one way that we've been seeing folks using that resiliency. The other way is that it can be helpful in the types of interventions or responses that we have for students. So you can really build on that as you go throughout. And there are a number of different ways that folks have used that type of thing. Again, there's a bunch of commercially available ones, and then there's also some free ones like the Gallup survey that give you an indication of getting started. So that's kind of the basic idea for the data. How do you organize that so you can see ABC data, you can begin to look at trends across students, you can see how they impact each other. How do we get that data in front of the staff members that are working directly with students and help them to use that and work with it? So to pair that, we really believe in this idea of the multi-tiered student support system. And it comes from a couple of different reasons, very similar to the other programs that I mentioned or the other models that I mentioned. So one, we have to have effective interventions in early warning systems, but we can't intervene our way to a stronger system. So if we continue to have kids falling off track, but we're not doing some of that preventative work, we might have an intervention, and if they go back into the math class, but the math class isn't set up well to support them, then they're going to end up back in their intervention. So we can't intervene our way to a stronger system. We need good foundational work. So second thing is that we've really seen that once kids have an off-track indicator, they either need to solve a problem or change something that they're doing, changing a behavior. Oftentimes this requires some kind of relationship between an adult and the student, and that helps them in one of those, either changing that behavior or solving a problem. And then lastly, and this really is the whole idea around the tiered intervention approach, is that you have more students in need than adults to form that relationship or to provide that intervention. We're not going to be able to do it. We're going to be chasing and chasing. We need to be able to build that foundation. So how do we flip that? How do we build better whole school tier 1 supports, prevent more of those things from happening? So just a quick review, kind of the definitions that I've been using as part of this. So one is the whole school or grade level, so starting at the bottom, evidence-based whole school classroom prevention for the ABCs. So, how do we make sure that we're having consistently strong instructional practices in every classroom? So a student is seeing that wherever they are in the building. How do we make sure that climate and culture is set up in a way so that students know that this is a welcoming, accepting place for them to be? If they have a challenge, they have someone that they can go to address it. How do we set up that foundation so that all of those things are working? Small group are targeted. If students are not responding to that first level, how do we provide targeted problem solving or moderate intensity supports when they're not responding to that prevention, or they run into something else outside of school that impacts that? And then lastly, how do we think about that individual or intensive level for high intensity needs? So this sometimes is a particular student in crisis, something happens that we need to intervene directly, but also can be for students who just progressively have not responded as we've tried to provide additional things, might need that individual work. So many of our schools, and this is just a sample here, so not necessarily particular intervention recommendations. It's just a sample of a school that I worked with this last year. What we oftentimes start with for schools is just mapping what you have available. What do you have available for attendance at the whole school level? What do you have available for behavior and effort? What do you have available for course performance? Trying to get a sense of where you are, looking at different targeted, where you might have gaps, but just starting a basic process of mapping what's available. As you can see, our idea with this is that we're really trying to pull all of it together, right? So, and so if you're doing a PBIS program, to me, you are already ahead on your behavior effort column. You've already got a head start on that. So how do we think about this comprehensively and all as part of a group? And when you have a sense of that, I think you really can get an idea of, like, do we have the need, capacity, and impact questions? So can we meet our need with the types of supports? If we have 50 students who need a math intervention, but we only have 20 seats in our intervention class, we start looking at some of those. What impacts do we see when we actually send students to that math intervention class? Are we seeing half of them or 3/4 of them actually making it back into their regular class? What are we seeing from that? And then lastly, I think really important for the intervention one, are we thinking about how we might alter what we're doing? We might have to change some of our basic practices if we're not seeing the outcomes that we want. Again, that's kind of the question of, this can't be just a student intervention piece of it. We might need to do some things as the adults in the building that change what we're working on to impact students. And so one question that oftentimes come up, so I put out a couple of resources to get folks started on these, about kind of interventions and supports that work. There's a lot of things out there, and this is a challenging one, and I think partially because it ranges so much from what you're doing. So some of them are individual, like interventions, like an attendance mentor type of intervention, such as the success mentors, which we're going to be talking about in a plenary tomorrow, I believe. But some of them are individual things like that. Some of them are a particular program, like a math intervention program, that actually would be a taught class throughout that. So it's a wide range. I acknowledge that can be hard. There's a couple of resources to get started. The What Works Clearinghouse from the U.S. Department of Ed has compiled research on effective programs for a variety of different topics: dropout prevention, reading, English. There's a bunch of different things that are there. So that's definitely worth looking at. There's a new site called the Evidence for ESSA that is starting to compile, compile research and evidence on programs that work. So another option for looking at some of those. The Middle School Matters Institute has, again, compiling research, trying to look at practices that are impactful. So it's less programs, but I think in some cases, it's looking at, like, what do we know from research about teaching vocabulary and how that can really impact students. So it has a nice research platform on that as well that you can see, and more around the practices side of it. But anyways, those are a couple to get you started. There's a lot of things that we're going to be doing in the center about how do we share, not only obviously, we want to look at things that have the highest level of evidence and research, but also some of the things that have some of that intermediate one, and are trying to see if that has impact, and we're trying to share and think through that with schools and districts. All right, so that's kind of the main idea for the intervention and data side of it. The next thing I share is just kind of how do we think about meeting around these indicators. So I think a lot of times we looking at our list of, if we look at a list of students of who we might need to talk about, this is kind of our general recommendation to get started on it. So if you have 0 to 20 who you feel like would have one of those ABC flags, we have seen that can be run by an individual person. Like one person can kind of take that on, it can be their role. If you have between 20 and 50 students, we think you need a dedicated team of staff members. And I feel like most schools that we've worked with fall between here and the top one. So you need a team. You need people to work with you. You need to work on that. If you have more than 50, then we really think you need to look at how do you build this into more of the workings of your school. So how do you get everyone more adults involved in this? How do you get everyone thinking about achievement in the ABCs as part of their work, not as something of an individual or of a team. So I think at its highest level of implementation, it's built into, you actually have interdisciplinary teacher teams meeting together to talk not only about the proactive, how do we create the climate and culture, consistency in instruction, but also about the intervention side of it. So, and we've done work, and there's actually a couple of webinars that we've done around EWI meetings where interdisciplinary teacher teams are meeting to coordinate the work of interventions. So, there's a protocol we've worked on and developed to be able to do that. So that's kind of the most intensive version of it and most robust implementation, I think, of early warning systems. All right, so I'm going to pause here, and I'm actually going to invite in our a colleague of mine that we have worked with a couple of times, and to talk a little bit about kind of the role of different individuals in this work. So, sorry, I'm going to go a couple slides here forward and introduce Marcus Gittens, who's going to be talking a little bit about what he has worked on in this, and I think it'll add a perspective, I think, that is a little bit more regional and district to what we're working on. I've kind of shared kind of the school-based, you know, how many teachers involved, how many different some of the organizing principles there. Marcus has really been working across a bunch of different districts, so I think has a district perspective there, and we'll be able to share a little bit more about that. So, Marcus, I think you should be unmuted now, so if I will pass it off to you to share a little bit about what you guys have done and how you see the roles differing across kind of from school level, district, and then you guys as a regional partner that's working to share practices.
Great, thank you, Johan. So I'm going to do a couple of things. I'm going to tell a little bit about our agency and the work that we do broadly, and then I'm going to share a few strategies that we've been implementing over the past few years to try to support our local school districts and schools in early warning implementation. So yes, a little bit about us. We are one of 9 regional service agencies in the state of Washington. We serve 35 school districts within our region, and that comprises about 40% of Washington State's K through 12 public school students. So broadly, we coordinate more than 70 programs and serve in a variety of ways through technology, through our work with supporting learning, teaching, and family support. We also have a pretty sizable early learning department as well. So now getting into some specific strategies that we've been trying over the past few years to support early warning implementation. So trainings and convening. So we've hosted a variety of trainings on various topics related to early warning implementation. Most recently, we've been having a heavy emphasis on attendance. Secondly, regional learning communities and coalitions. And so for the past several years, we've hosted 2 regional learning communities where district leads can come together to talk about what's working and where the challenges lie in early warning implementation. Also, we do host a coalition of district superintendents and community college presidents that work on strategy pieces, all aimed at more students on track for graduation and also post-secondary access. Our Student Success Link EWIS data system is a tool that we are offering to community-based organizations so that in their work with students, they can also be supportive, especially when it comes to checking in with students around the ABCs. And so this provides real-time data to community-based organizations in their work with students. And then we've also partnered with a plethora of national, state, and community agencies to make all of this work happen. Okay, going to the next slide here. So one of the roles that we play in this region along with a few others, is to capture and disseminate information as it comes out nationally that may be relevant to the work happening here, also sharing promising local practices that are occurring in our region, so finding what's working here locally and sharing that out broadly, and also creating toolkits really tailored to the needs of our local school districts here. So most recently, we adapted an attendance toolkit, mainly using resources from Attendance Works, really aimed at supporting our districts and our schools with communication around improving attendance. So also we are involved in some local research studies. I'll mention one that we're currently involved in. We're testing whether or not a research-based curriculum will actually serve to improve attendance and engagement. So we're working with a couple of school districts to test this intervention and then to share what we learn broadly within our region. And so another role that we play in our region is to support schools and districts in an understanding and complying with legislation that comes out. So I'll give you an example. Last year, there was new legislation that required schools and districts to host community truancy boards and to have a multi-tiered systems of support related to attendance. And so we hosted an event to explain exactly what was required of districts and to also support attendance interventions. Also in our work, we do pass on some funds to schools and districts to support their implementation. Typically, this is between $10,000 and $20,000. So this allows schools to increase their capacity a little bit to launch or to advance this work. An example of how our mini grant funds were used, they were used recently in a school to support school-wide training around social-emotional learning and also implementing a curriculum with social-emotional learning strategies embedded. And we also share everything that we learn with local funders who are looking for opportunities to fund local community agencies and other entities involved in this work in various levels. So that's a little bit about how we serve our region in early warning implementation and still looking to do better and deeper work in that area. Thanks, Johan.
Great. Marcus, one other question I'm curious if you could talk to a little bit. So you guys work across a wide variety of districts, right? I'm just curious if you've seen the role that they play in early warning systems at the school level, so kind of what they do. Could you talk a little bit about just the differences that you've seen among those, among the different districts that you work with?
Yes, of course. So I'll just share some thoughts broadly about what I've noticed happening in our region. So many of our district offices are supporting with district-wide implementation and really identifying those key strategies that are sort of must-haves in implementation while allowing schools to really focus in a way that allows them to tailor their implementation to the local context of their schools. I've also noticed that many of our districts do a lot of the heavy lifting when it comes to data and data dashboards. So whether it's working with a vendor or creating a tool themselves or sending weekly or periodic updates to staff around how data is going is a sort of centralized support that I've noticed happening in our region. And then finally, there are many efforts, as you mentioned, Johan, earlier in your presentation, very much related to early warning and addressing the ABCs. And so streamlining and aligning those efforts across the district so that staff understand how, for example, PBIS and early warning work together is certainly a role that I've seen our district leadership play in this region.
Okay. Great. That's really helpful, Marcus. I think because I think the kind of why this last part that we wanted to do and why I asked Marcus to join us, I think that they bring an interesting perspective on this, right? So I think there can be a role, obviously, for regional folks such as the Puget Sound Educational Service District to help share resources and bring that across. But as you can see, there's also a wide variety of roles that districts can play in that, and making sure that the setup is in a good spot. So I appreciate your thoughts on that. I think that's as helpful as we're thinking about how to think about implementation. So I will, if folks have questions for Marcus, please add them into the chat window. I have one last piece I want to share, and then we'll open it up for questions from either one of us about kind of the work that's happening at both of those. So I will, sorry, I'm going back one slide here, but I think there's a couple of things that state or regional, oh shoot, I want to do the district. So we'll start with district or regional role in EWS. So some of these you heard Marcus talk about that he worked on. So training or guidance for schools. Obviously districts are looking at building or purchasing their own data systems that can be an early warning data system, or if they have a product already that they can build pieces into that or make better use of it. Building in graduation rates, attendance rates, and on-track rates into school report cards, so we know what's there, we know what's available, we know what those things are, we know, given how important they are, making the connections. And then the last one that I don't think was mentioned, but this idea of validating the indicators and thresholds. So there's been some work on that by the regional educational laboratories around validating those thresholds. So that's also something where we've seen districts or regions or states as well take on some of that. It's a heavier lift to do that, not something that's easily done at the school level. So wanted to share some of those as well. All right, so the last thing I'm going to share, just kind of the getting started, my 6 ideas for getting started, is the and then we'll open it up for the last 10 minutes or so for questions. So first one, so these are just 6 different things that we've seen as helpful in getting started for early warning systems. So the first one is just compiling and starting to use student ABC data. So you can do that on a very basic level like this, where you're just compiling it for 4 or 5 students and having a conversation. I think it's really helpful just to get started in compiling that and using that student data. So that's the first one, just to feel more comfortable and use it. It works especially well at the school site. Second one, and this is school or district or state, is starting to pull together data that helps you look at trends for grades in schools. And do we see differences among these? Do we see attendance being a challenge in 8th grade but not in 6th grade? Do we see behavior more focused in the 7th grade or more focused in the 11th grade? What are those differences? Are there particular regions of your city or of your state that seem to be having more challenges with chronic absenteeism than others? So really trying to look across those. So that's the second one, is trying to look at trends. The third one, I think, is a great starting point, and again, these are just a compiled sample of what you see on there, but just mapping what resources you have available. So it can be a basic grid chart to get started, and can help you understand what you have available and what you're working from, and help you dig into some of those other questions. That's the third one. The fourth one is starting to meet about students using ABC data. This can be at a variety of levels. So you might not be able to start with the most comprehensive implementation of early warning systems where you're at the interdisciplinary teacher level. But if you already have grade level teams, or you already have a 9th grade academy or a small learning community, it can be a great process for them to use to identify and support students. Other spaces, I would just encourage you to look for spaces. It could be an EWS team, a small number of people who are just getting started, starting to meet about students and ABC data. So that's number 4. Number 5 is really just this idea of student advocates, that you're connecting students to adults. And this is helping them with problem solving, and it's helping with relationship building, helping students change those behaviors. So it's a wide variety of initiatives that can be done in that. Some of the more formal ones, like success mentors, which is a big part of our center, you can hear more about throughout our conference over the next couple of days. But there are other methods, other check-in approaches, other type of conferencing type activities that connect students with adults. We see this as a strategy that can help as a standalone and as you develop further interventions. And then lastly, I would look at where you have partners. So I put a couple of partners on there that I'm aware of that I've worked with that are using early warning systems or ABC data as a part of their work. Some of the United Way organizations have, communities and schools and City Year have both started using this as part of their work. But there's good opportunities, I think, to connect with people who are working with your students and have this be a common language, especially around attendance. I think attendance can be something that is really a shared community strategy and value about attendance. So that's the sixth one, is how do we try to build some of that language, talk to other people about this. So I'll end with this, and then we'll open up for questions. As we started with this idea of around early warning systems, of really being both sides of this. And if we don't do both sides, we're selling ourselves short in it. So we need the indicator side. We need that easy to get data. We need it easy to use. We need it to be reliable and predictive. But we need to pair it with the intervention system. If we don't do that, we're not going to be able to. We're only going to have half of our approach. So I encourage you, as you guys get started on this, to think about both sides of that and what work you need to prioritize. All right. So I will pass it back to Dantel to help us with questions. We have a couple minutes for questions, and then we have a couple. One final thing for you guys to complete before we sign off.
Thanks, Johan. The first question that came through is from Brian Blank. The question is, how is the academic risk indicator calculated or weighed?
So I'll share a couple of thoughts on that. I mean, at its most, so there's probably two different answers to it. One of them, you can just start with basically it is a flag if a student has failed one of their core courses. So that's usually where we recommend that folks start. For many cases, people have tried to get more advanced in kind of how they prioritize students. So for instance, if we went to the very basic level where you could have 4 indicators, you could be failing math is 1, failing English is 2, a behavior is 3, attendance is 4. So a student could have basically a score of 0 to 4. We have seen some schools do that to help prioritize. And then the more advanced one, and I don't have a good blanket recommendation on this, but there are some districts that have tried to figure out more of a overall formula score, that helps them weight things, I think, which is what you're getting at a little bit, is how do you weight some things? Are some things more important than others? I don't have a good recommendation of something that works in multiple places on that. So we have usually recommended that folks start with those basic ABCs to start with, if they're able to do some of that weighting a little bit, but we have not seen that consistently to feel like we could make a recommendation across the board on that one.
The next question is from Marcus. It's from Sajana Budasoki. They would like to know, can you please explain more about Community Truancy Board?
Yes, that's a great question. So community truancy boards are intended to be an intervention so that students can avoid the court process when it comes to addressing truancy. So what a community truancy board is a board comprised of school, court, and local community representatives in which the community in which the child attends school. And it's intended to be a supportive environment where jointly between the board, the youth, and the family, they can openly discuss reasons behind the child's absences and create a plan of action to address whatever barriers or concerns came from that discussion. So a joint plan is created and a contract is signed between all parties. And if this is a Tier 3 intervention, because of its intensity, only a handful of students per district per year, the way it's set up here in Washington, can receive this support, and it's shown to be somewhat effective in helping students avoid the full truancy process through the courts.
Thank you, Marcus. Bethany Silver asked, given guidelines for student data privacy, how can we leverage ABC data in our partnership? And do you recommend MOUs?
So I can start with that one, and then Marcus, I'm curious if you guys have helped with this too.
Sure.
So yes is the short answer on MOUs. I would recommend that for sure. We've been a part of a couple of partnerships where there were data sharing agreements to make sure that we're following all of the information around student privacy, making sure that we're not sharing that information with people who don't need it, but that it is focused on being able to respond to the needs of that student. And I think we've been able, and I've seen in other places as well where there's been good agreements on that. And actually, as part of the Success Mentors project, the work that's currently going on is going on across 30 cities across the U.S. But it started in New York City, and they have actually some sample MOUs from that project that they used within that because they had a lot of community-based organizations as a part of it. So yes, for sure, I would say do that. It is a little sticky for sure. I mean, can be a tough conversation, but I think we've seen it be possible if it's very focused on making sure that student's privacy is protected, but also making sure that people who are working with that student could be better informed and provide better services. So, Marcus, anything from your end of kind of what you've seen in that realm?
Yeah, absolutely. So I totally agree with what you said around MOUs. Very important. I mentioned our Student Success Link EWIS data dashboard that we are in the process of trying to support community agencies and using it to better support their students. So in that process, we really try to streamline the MOU process between community-based organizations and the districts that they are working with. So we try to streamline that process. That process was different in each district. So that's number one. And then number two, the agreement in terms of sharing data is also between the agency and the student and family. And so the agency would need to obtain those consents before an MOU with the district could be obtained to get the data. So there's several steps that we take in terms of ensuring privacy for students and for families.
We have no more questions, but Megan Thornton submitted a comment. A struggle we have had is with breaking the cycle with our families and having the parents not put importance in attending school. Struggling with how to productively intervene when a parent is constantly calling in and allowing their student to miss. And so,
Dantel, I'll just share one thing on that before you share the last piece. I mean, that is definitely an issue, a challenge on it. Two quick thoughts, and then I would encourage folks to go and look at some of the other or attend some of the other sessions, which will dig into attendance. One, there was something I just saw this morning actually about a couple of interventions that have been studied around basically helping better inform parents about what it looks like and what it means when students miss. So it's a parent-focused intervention. So kind of interesting, some potential progress there in terms of that intervention. And then the other thing I'll mention is that too, I think on, especially in the middle and high school grades, students can be a leverage point for that. Sometimes their parents are not seeing the importance of attendance, but sometimes their students are, and we can help, they can help leverage that. The students can be the ones who are saying, yes, I have to be there, yes, I need to do that. Obviously a different conversation in the early grades, but I will say we have seen some of that. So anyways, I acknowledge that is definitely a tough cycle to break. I encourage folks to attend some of the attendance sessions if those I think are good spaces to learn more and dig into some particular interventions on that.
Thank you, Johan. And thank you very much for attending today, everyone. We hope you found it helpful and informative. We would like to invite you to attend upcoming events that we will be having and stay connected to the center. On the screen, you'll see our upcoming webinars and an address if you have questions or comments. We will send a link to the recorded webinar in the coming weeks. Before you leave, please be sure to complete the poll questions that will pop up. Thank you.